This video um, continues in the Upper Paleolithic or end of the Pleistocene when we are still hunter gatherers. However, by about 40,000 BC, um, we are the only hominin left on the planet. You see that on the graph on the top, and our various ancestors behind there. And on the bottom, you see the skulls. And the far right is one example of a Homo sapiens sapiens skull. To the next of that is the Neanderthal skull. And then down the line through some of the species we talked about before. One interesting thing to notice, by the way, is that the Neanderthal's brain cranium has more space than ours. But once again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's smarter just because the brain's a little bit bigger. And from the artifacts we find, that doesn't seem to be the case. But in any case, Neanderthals go extinct around 40,000. And then we're the last ones left standing. We believe that these Homo sapiens, as you look on the very top there, evolved in Africa and then spread out of Africa, just like Erectus had done before. And then Neanderthal was sort of a European subspecies, subgrouping of the Homo sapiens. We are, so like each other. We're Homo sapiens sapiens, and as you see on the slide, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. So our difference is only on the level of a subspecies. It was debated for a long time whether we could interbreed with these hominins, and in addition to that, along with that was did they die off? Did we kill them off, or what? And it now looks like we actually just watered down their DNA a lot. That we mated with them, and eventually they just disappeared. And specialists in DNA can go through some Europeans and find little alleles, little parts of the DNA strand that are in fact Neanderthals. Though that type sort of died out, we don't think we killed it off. And here we see the difference in the skulls. La Chapelle on the left is Neanderthal. Cro-Magnon on the right is Homo sapiens sapien. Notice that it has greater prognathism, that is to say, La Chapelle's the snout sticks out farther, and the brain casing is back. The face is in front of the brain casing. The casing is sort of more football shaped than it is round, and these large supraorbital ridges. Eventually, as the brain gets larger, the face gets pushed underneath the brain. And what's interesting about that is that that's not exactly a perfect idea, because, for example, with our wisdom teeth, right, that come in when we were late teens, early 20s, there's no room for them anymore in our mouths, and they have to be pulled because the brain has gotten too large, and our dental structure has not been able to adapt to it. And we were hunter-gatherers, as we've discussed before. Hunter-gatherers are a nomadic group of people. They have to go where the animals and the plants are. They have small families because they are nomadic, so you don't want to have children every year. You want perhaps just one child, strapped to your back or something, and then the next one has to be sort of a toddler at least, able to walk. We only have two hands, and there's only so many kids we could guide. And so from ethnographic studies, that is to say studies of modern hunter-gatherers, they keep the family small and the social grouping small, like 40 or 50, usually interconnected via blood or marriage lines, and completely nomadic. Here we see the spread of Homo sapiens, sort of paralleling that which happened with Homo erectus a long time before. But don't think that we evolved out of Homo erectus from different parts of the globe. It was Homo sapiens were a new species that evolved and then spread out of Africa and basically replaced all the previous hominins. And I show you this slide to talk about the tools real quick. Don't worry about the oxygen isotope stage. We see modern on the top and on the bottom. The one is on the bottom with Neanderthals because we did overlap with Neanderthals. And then tools were made, it's called the Middle Paleolithic, when Neanderthals were alive, that are called core tools. And that is to say, we reduce the tool from the stone cobble, and what's left at the core is our tool. So here we see a hand axe in the center. Well, in the Upper Paleolithic, they get a lot more sophisticated, and they make blades from cores, and so it's the stone that comes off the core that is shaped into blades and arrowheads, and quite frankly, far, far more sophisticated tools than what existed before, and very, very lethal ones. We're going to talk about this distribution of our ancestors here, and we can see Lascaux and other sites in Europe. And so we will be talking about these when Homo sapiens just first left Africa. And back to the tools here. One of the reasons they can make better tools is it's no longer just direct percussion, which is to say, take one rock and whack it against another one to make something. That's direct percussion. Indirect percussion is when you hold a bone or a horn or something to that effect and guide the power from the strike to a very specific part. And then you're able to make much finer tools and much more sophisticated tools with this, what's called indirect percussion. I show you the one on the left just because I want you to pay attention to the guy on the right, which is he uses a stomach punch to make these tools, which is thought that they must have had, although there's no straight out evidence for it. And we see the development of tools on the upper right as we go through time, and as we see cobbles that were associated with Homo habilis, hand axes with the Acheulean, and then we work our way up to blades. And we see various examples of them. You can see on the upper left, they're made for very, very deadly and lethal projectile points. And indeed, as we'll see, they were able to take down large animals with these. And they most likely hunted in a group. It's the cooperative efforts, which is another sign of our species, is the extent to which we cooperate in such matters. And so you can see, for example, on the bottom right, it goes from sort of the top to the bottom in these various modes 1 through 5. You don't have to know them, but it's just there's a chronological order of when these tools are made, 5 being the last, and also it's a more sophisticated level of tool production. And here we see in the center there how you can just take a cobble and break parts off of it to then create a good striking platform. And then you want to hit on the top of it and follow those arrows down, and you'll get facets, and they will make for nice flakes. Very, very strong cutting flakes. If you make one of these out of obsidian, for example, I mean, they're as sharp as any razor. And indeed, eye doctors use obsidian when they do surgery. It's so fine. And here we see flint with a cobble that's already been sort of cleaned off of its cortex, its exterior, and then can be used as a core to make further tools. And once again, we get tools like so. We get blades, and then nice little arrowheads, like the center on the left there, that's retouched a lot. That is to say, once they make the shape, they touch it so the edges are serrated and stronger. That's called retouch. We also get things like what are called these microlithic tools, small tools called geometrics, because they have triangles, rectangles, etc. On the upper right, the burins, things to carve, use the top needle to carve into, and so they're making a bunch of sophisticated chipped chipped stone tools. We don't see any really many ground stone tools. We'll get to that when we get to farming. And here are just some more examples. These, nicely colored tools. Basically, the stone has to have some sort of cryptocrystalline structure to it, i.e., somewhere near glass or like glass, so it breaks this way and doesn't just straight out shatter when you strike it. I should tell you, these are really hard to make. Actually, you think they look simple, but when you first try to make stone tools, the stone just usually smashes into smithereens on you, and you really have to know what you're doing. And once and I know people that can do it, they spent years practicing. We, of course, back in the day, back in hunter-gatherers, we would all have to know how to do this in order to survive. As they say, if you didn't do it, you didn't eat. So that they made these wonderful tools, as arrowheads, cutting implements, etc. Here we see on the right this nice leaf point, it's called. Notice how nice this projectile point is with its retouch along the edges and the perfect symmetry to the point that it's almost like artwork. On the left, we have some more bone spears here with serious barbs in them. So once they got implanted into an animal, it wasn't going to fall out easily. And so further evidence, these guys were serious hunters. And indeed, as we'll talk about in the next class, they probably caused the extinction of several species at the end of the ice ages, around 10 to 12,000 years ago. They also had these tools called atlatls. And the atlatl is a really good tool because it basically extends the arm and makes the force behind the projectile all the stronger. Excuse me. On the right are handles. Well, implements to help you throw the spear. These are called atlatls. On the bottom right is probably clearest. On the tail on the left of the animal, you see how it hooks. That's where you would put the butt of the arrow or spear in and then project it. The one on the top, it was probably underneath the head on the left as well. And what these basically do is lengthen your arm. So we get strength from our arms, from our shoulder to our elbows is sort of the first, flex, and then elbows to the wrist, and then wrist to the hands. And each one of those flexing motions makes the throwing all the stronger. And then with the atlatl, it just adds another part to an arm and really makes for a powerful spear. However, you have to be pretty proficient with these. You have to know what you're doing. But they did, and they made lots of them. And once again, here back to what some of these handles look like and how they threw them to give you a good idea of how they worked and just the wonderful artistry in them as well. Here we see two bovines. They're missing their heads, but they sort of, brace or charge each other. And then there's a hole underneath their stomachs. So you can put your finger there, and then the bottom left with the hook would actually be on the top, and that's where you would, or facing upwards, I should say, at the back, and that's where you would lock in your spear and throw it. So they put some artistry into these things and frequently had animals as the handle because that's what they're hunting and what they're very familiar with. And as I mentioned before, they can bring down large animals like the woolly mammoth. Not only does it provide a whole bunch of meat, the bones and the skin would be very useful, and the tusks. But these are large animals the size of elephants. And it probably took a group of people to kill one of these, and it would have been pretty dangerous. And you pretty much had to have projection tools that that are projectiles. You couldn't, the Neanderthal with a hand axe. Let's say he or she tied that to the end of a stick. It's still not a throwing implement. You'd have to run up to the animal and charge it and stab it. With a woolly mammoth, that could be pretty dangerous. They could use the bones and the hides to make tents. There's many of these found in actually what's modern Ukraine. Interestingly enough, they frequently separate the types of bones in different levels. So, for example, the femurs are around the bottom that give the foundation to the tent. On the top, ribs are used because they're lighter bones and they arch, and then you can spread hide over that. So, in addition to the caves, which we're going to talk more about, they did have these less permanent shelters. All these are hard to find because there's not much there, and they can erode due to weathering, etc., over time. We also have little calendars. These bones with these holes in them were studied for a long time until a French scholar by the name of Marchak figured out that what they were was recording the lunar calendar. And if you are a hunter, you need to know what time, what month it is, what day of the year it is, etc., to know when, because you'll know when the animals are coming through or not, and when plants are edible or not. And so this shows the different phases of the moon and gets us through a month. And so they were measuring time, which is quite fascinating and quite a sophisticated action, and it shows very highly symbolic thinking, where they could they imagine, they could measure, the day after day. And so that's quite important. Now, one other thing, too, is they started making nice figurines. This is a famous one called the Venus of Willendorf. Willendorf was where it was found. They're called Venus figurines because back in the 19th century, they found them and they would say, well, these are like the goddess of love, Venus, because, they're sexually charged. So they got that name. And they are sexually charged. We can see special reference to the large breasts with the hands over it and the large buttocks. And then on the head, there's no facial features, just hair. So this is, to focus the eye on the genitalia. And they are portable. So they could have been taken around and shown to other people. Well, they indeed were, because these are found all over Europe and Western Asia. And they all share these features of being very large-breasted and bellied. Here's another example. You got to keep in mind, as a hunter-gatherer, it would be very beneficial to be large like this. It meant you were well-fed, you had a lot of fat on you, you could survive, and we think they probably considered it beautiful. Beauty changes over time, and this is how they made their female figurines. Notice she too has no facial features, arms over her breasts. On the right is another figurine from the same site. Notice the skirt that it wears underneath its breasts. A specialist by the name of Elizabeth Barber studies ancient textiles and calls these peekaboo dresses because they don't really cover her at all. They don't protect her from the elements. All they do is draw the eye to that part of the body. So we do think that these were sexually charged figurines. And we get the famous example from Lesbu, which this one is just a sort of strange conglomeration of buttocks and breasts, etc. It's hard exactly to know what to make of it. But notice on the left-hand side, below the large buttocks, is a skirt there. So once again, they're wearing clothing, but the skirt doesn't seem to be covering the body or protecting the body from the elements, but more to, once again, focus the eye. And with the next class, we'll come back to some more artwork.